Hey everyone, OmniDev here. I'm going to show you how to use Redux with React.js. More specifically, Next.js, because this is going to be a purely React.js website, so might as well use that framework. Redux is great because it allows you to use state from a global perspective, meaning every single component in your React app should share state. This is most useful for large apps that have so many components that you can't even begin to count them, or maybe your tree of components are so far branched out that it becomes impractical to pass props. But for the sake of making an easy to grasp tutorial, I'm going to just make a simple app. I'll be using the npm package create next app to create our Next.js app. From the desktop, I'll create a project folder. I'll just name it React Redux. We'll open that folder and grab the path, and from the command prompt, we'll cd into that folder. As it says from the readme in this package, we'll run this command to create our starter project, npx create next app at latest. Run that. If it asks you to install, just hit yes, and name your project whatever you want. I'll just use the default name because it doesn't matter to me right now. TypeScript does not matter to me, and ESLint does not matter to me. You don't have to put no to use Redux. I'm just, again, keeping this video simple. And now our app is created. As you can see, it created another folder. I don't really want that, so I'll just drag its contents back into the original project folder and delete this now empty folder. And then we'll open this project inside of Visual Studio Code. Now we'll run this project in development mode with npm run dev, and you'll see that the Next.js app is running with their default template. I'm going to be creating my own app for this tutorial, so I'll just wipe everything out that we don't need. So we don't need this API route. I don't need all this HTML or JSX, whatever. These imports are no longer used. We'll just have this set to hello world. I'm gonna get rid of the contents in public because I won't be using these icons. I won't be using dark theme, and this CSS file isn't used. Okay, so here's our new fresh project that says hello world. So to teach you how to use Redux, I'm just gonna make a simple app that asks for your name to use it in various components. Let's start by having it ask for our name. We'll of course need an input so they can type in their name, and we'll need a button to trigger name usage. So here's our basic UI. Let's make it a little functional. So to collect their name, we're going to need to use the reference hook. Start by importing that, and then create the hook and use the hook. So now we have a way of collecting the name. Let's put the name to use. So every time we click the button, we'll want to call a function called useName, and let's create that function. And for now, we'll just log that name to the console. Console.log name.current.value. Now to demonstrate, we'll enter our name OmniDev, hit submit, and it logs the name to the console. Now let's say we want our name to display down here in a separate component. We'll create a new component called display name that simply says hello name. This is just a placeholder for now. Of course, we would want our submitted name to display instead, but right now we have no way for this component to know what the name is. This is where Redux will finally come in. So to use Redux, we are going to need to install their packages. The command being npm install react redux, and we're going to use a Redux Toolkit called redux.js/toolkit. Now the packages are installed. Going back to our project, I'll create a new folder called Redux, and to get started, we're going to need to create a Redux store. So we'll create a file, just call it store.js, and start off our code with an import configure store from the Redux Toolkit. And the default export should be configure store. Configure store takes an object as its first parameter, and each value would be a Redux reducer, or more specifically, a Redux.js Toolkit styled reducer. Let's create a new folder inside of our Redux folder, and we'll name it reducers. Since we're asking for your name, we're gonna just pretend it's for someone's profile. So for this new reducer I'm going to create, I'll just call it profile.js. And to start it off, we're going to need to import create slice from the Redux Toolkit. Now let's create a Redux Toolkit slice with const profile slice equals create slice. We'll pass it an object, and it does expect 3 values. The first one being a name. What are we going to name this slice? I'll just call it profile. It will also expect an initial state being an object. This will just be your default state, and by default we'll say that their name is none. And finally, we're going to need to create a reducer. and then it's just going to be a bunch of actions inside, which are functions. So we'll just name our first function set name. All reducers will take 2 parameters, and all reducer functions will take 2 parameters, being state and action. So what I want to happen when we call set name is to set the name in our initial state to the payload of our action. So that would look like state.name, initial state.name equals action.payload. So this is our slice. This is how Redux Toolkit makes it extremely easy to create our reducers and actions. If we did it using plain Redux, it would be a lot more code. This is all we need so far, except we need a way to call this file. So by default, we are going to export the profile slice reducer, and we're going to want to export our set name reducer. So we'll say export constant set name equals our slice dot actions. So now we can call this set name as an action. So now we'll want to make use of this profile reducer inside of our Redux Toolkit store. Instead of the configure store object, we're going to create a key called reducer, which is also going to be an object which will take in the reducers that we create. So we're going to name this reducer profile, which would take in this file as an import. So let's import that, import profile reducer from reducers profile, and now we can pass that as the value. So now we've created our store, but we have not yet put it to use inside of our app. So inside of pages, we'll open up app.js, the root of our app, and we'll want to import provider from the React Redux package. This is the plain original React Redux package, not the Redux Toolkit package. And now we'll want to wrap our entire app inside of this provider component. So inside of the my app function, I'll create these parentheses, move this out the way for now, create the provider component, wrap our old code inside of that provider component. Provider does expect a prop, being store, but what do we set it as? It would be the store file that we created. So let's say import Redux store from the Redux folder and the store file. So we can say the provider store is the Redux store. At this point, we should see that the app is not erroring. Now we can start to set the state of the Redux store. So now let's try to display the name from profile's initial state instead of hello name. To do that, we'll need to import useSelector from React Redux, and we'll say constant name being useSelector, with that first parameters being state, and we'll want to return profile from that state. Ultimately, this returns the state of our profile reducer, but we deconstruct it to only grab the name. So now we can say name, and it will display none. Now let's make a way for us to update our profile state's name instead of only logging the name reference. We would do that with dispatch. So we're going to do another import, which will be useDispatch from the React Redux package. And to make proper use of the useDispatch import, we will say const dispatch equals useDispatch. We'll also need to import the set name action. So import set name from Redux profile reducers profile.js. This is what we would pass to our dispatch function. And now we can pass the value of our text input. So what's going on here? Dispatch is what we use to actually send a request to Redux, and the first parameter that we passed is an action, set name, which we created here. So what's going to happen inside of that action? So we're going to set the state's name to the action's payload. The action's payload being the first parameter of that action. And to demonstrate, what's your name? Omnidev, submit, and now it says hello Omnidev. So that's how you use Redux. And that should be everything you need to know. And from this simple app, you should now know how to create your Redux store, how to create your Redux Toolkit slices. By wrapping your app inside of the provider, your entire app has access to the Redux state. In other words, your app now has access to global state. You should have also learned that you use dispatch to update the state instead of your reducers. And you should know that you use useSelector to grab the value of state in your reducers. That should be everything you need to know to get started with Redux. I'm going to mess around a little bit more just to make this app slightly more complicated, but at this point we're pretty much done with the tutorial. I'll create another component to display our name just to say name is cool. Now we have multiple components that make use of our global state and grab our name to display them on the page. Hello OmniDev, OmniDev is cool. We've done that without passing a single prop. The display name component and who's cool component have no way of accessing the home component scope, yet it grabs the name. That's Redux. I'll mess around some more and add to the initial state. We'll say sleepy is true. We'll need to grab that sleepy state inside of this destructure, and let's make use of that variable. So now by default, our code will say that name is cool and tired, because if sleepy is true, we say tired, and again by default, sleepy is true. And if we change the default sleepy state to say false, it'll say that OmniDev is cool and wide awake. If you wanted to change the sleepy state, you would again just use dispatch, create another reducer that sets sleepy. Anyway, that's everything. Hopefully you learned how to use Redux Toolkit with Next.js. This isn't necessarily a Redux tutorial or a Next.js tutorial, so I hope you were not expecting something much more detailed. This video more assumes that you kind of understand Redux, Next.js, and React.js. So if this video helped you, please leave a like. I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you for watching and have a good one.